Hi, my name is Simon Bennett. I'm the ZAP founder and project lead. And this, as you may know, this is a series of training sessions I'm giving for the folks here at Stackorg. Plenty of people on the call, so they may ask questions as we go along. But if you're watching this afterwards, if you've got any questions, just ask them in the comments and we'll get back to you. So what I've been doing is I have been talking about exploring your applications in ZAP and why it's so important. And this is the last session on exploring applications. And so it covers quite a few different things. But what I'll do now is share my screen and hopefully you'll now see ZAP. So I've talked about the spiders. We've got the standard spider and the traditional spider. So these are ways of exploring your applications. But we can also do other things to find out about your application. And one of them is importing stuff. So we have an import menu here. And the first one is importing a file containing URLs. Now, this has got to be a local file. Obviously, it's kind of if you're using the desktop, then that's not too surprising, but it's supported via the API as well. So I'll just switch over to browser and point it at ZAP. And if you ever want to play around with the ZAP API, then yeah, the easiest way to learn about it is to point your browser directly at the app ZAP, and I'll just make this a bit bigger so you can see it. So go to local API, and we've got an option there for importing URLs. And you have to give the file path. And again, this has got to be local. So if you're running the API on a remote machine, it's still got to actually be local to where ZAP is running. So with these, I'm not going to do many demos, just going to point these things out to you. But we have a couple other options via the API, and these are under the core component. Actually, while I remember, I will go back to the import API because I have been showing where code is for these, and lots of the add-ons which are not part of the core. And we go down here and we will see import URLs. So all of the code for that, which as you'll probably see is not a huge amount. There's just a couple of, there's just one class for the extension and one for defining the API. So you can go in here, you can see, all we have to do is actually define what the API looks like to ZAP and then handle it when it gets called. So if you want to play around with adding APIs to anything, it's actually quite easy. But then we have said we've got other options with the API. So in core, we have to go down to the actions. We have access URL. So this is where you can specify a URL and you've got the option for following redirects. This will only do gets, whereas if we go back to here and we've got some options for, actually mentioned here on the access URL, we can go to send request and I'll send har request as well, which is har request. So send request, I think it's just the raw request, and send har, obviously it's in the har format. And so all of these things will send a request through ZAP. You can, of course, just proxy anything you like through ZAP as well, which we've talked about before. These are, because they're part of the core API, they're not under ZAP extensions, so they are under ZA proxy. Again, we've got extensions under here, and then API. So this is all of the code that relates to the API infrastructure. But we do have a core API class, and this is where we define all of these things. So we should see, yep. So we've got all the code for sending requests. So all of anything which is in the core API section is in this file, core API. So those are the options via the API. But we also have some other options. Go back to ZAP. And what we can do is we can import some definitions. So we've got options for importing OpenAPI definitions. And with these, you can point to a URL for the definition and for the target, or you can point to the file store. And we also have options for importing GraphQL. That is actually different from the Stackhawk GraphQL add-on. So we haven't actually done a comparison of those, but this is one which is relatively new. We also have a SOAP API, an option for importing SOAP definitions as well. Now, that is not currently on the marketplace because there are some problems with it, but it is being fixed right now as we speak. So I will just go back to ZAP extensions, and we go back to the add-ons, and we should see that there is an OpenAPI add-on down here. So all of the code you'll find under this section. And we then also have one for GraphQL here and one for SOAP as well, which will be down here. And actually, if we go up to the top and look at pull requests, we'll see a fix for the SOAP add-on, which is being implemented by Akshat, who's one of the newest core team members and has been working on a lot of these things. So those are the options for importing definitions and URLs. And actually, while I was actually looking through the code, I then remembered we did have another option. And if we go to the marketplace and type import, we'll see we've got a log file importer. So this will import log files from mod security and files previously exported from ZAP. So I've actually forgotten about that. So as you can see, you've got lots of options here. But what I wanted to do now is actually just go back to the Spider. So I'm going to go to the standard Spider, and I'm going to do a new scan, and I'm going to scan budget. And what we'll see is, this is a bit of a silly example, but it's just convenient for me now. And what I do is have a look down at, so ZAP has found the search form, and it has actually made a request on the search form. And you'll see it is got Q equals ZAP. So whenever the Spider runs, it will throw in default parameters. And that might be okay in some cases, but in other cases it might not be okay. So what we have is we actually have a form handler. Now this, I don't think it's included. So these actually sit since 2.9.0, so you won't have it by default. But you can install it from the marketplace, and it may well be included in 2.10 by default. What the form handler does, it allows you to put different values in. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new option, and the parameter is Q, and so I'm going to put a different value in there. And OK that. And what I'll do is I will actually start a new session, so nice and clean. And then I'll run the Spider again, kick that off, and have another look at the sites tree. And hopefully down here, we'll have Q equals a different value. So if you have some forms and they need very specific things, possibly email addresses or something like that, in order to explore your application effectively, then this is how you can actually specify your own values. Now, the form handler doesn't currently have an API, but it does actually, because it's in the options, all of these things are being stored as options, which means you can specify them via the config parameter when you start up ZAP. So you can automate this stuff, even though you can't do it via the API. So it is supported by the standard Spider, by OpenAPI and GraphQL as well. It is not actually supported by the Ajax Spider yet. We've got an open issue for that, but hopefully that will be done before too long. One other thing I should mention actually is both the OpenAPI and GraphQL add-ons. If the Spider detects one of those definitions, then they get imported automatically. So you can either specify them via the API options, or if ZAP finds them as part of the spidering, then they'll get imported automatically. The ZAP core has this concept of a value generator, and there is a default value generator, but the form handler actually provides its own value generator. So if you want to be able to generate, put your own values into the spiders or the other tools that import definitions, then you can either use the default value generator, which is hard-coded. You can use the form handler, where you can add those definitions, or you can actually implement your own value generator and register it with ZAP. So you'd have to do that via code, but that is certainly possible, and just shows you how flexible ZAP is. On the topic of the plugging into the Spider, extension GraphQL, so this is where what we do is we try and get hold of the standard Spider, and we have this is a very standard piece of code which you find a lot of around a lot of the ZAP code base. Control.get singleton.get extension loader, and then get extension. So we can get hold of any extension that has actually been registered with ZAP. We do need to check it exists because somebody could have actually unregistered it. You could remove it from ZAP if you wanted to, your own version. But then we define these custom parsers, the filter and the custom parser. So if you want to hook into the Spider, so that if the Spider detects a particular definition you want to import it, this is how you do it. So that's the form handler and various importing things. Anyone listening right now, any questions about any of that? No? All good. So what I'll do now is just have a quick, I just want to show you the structure we've got here, the stuff that we found by spidering. Because I want to show you the last option we've got for finding stuff, and that is force browse. So I'm going to discard that session, and what I do is force browse is actually included standard in ZAP, but it's one of these, it's something that was added quite a long time ago. It's one of the earliest things that was added. It's actually based on an old OWASP project called Dirbuster. And what I'm going to do is, so I'm going to make a manual request. So I just get, so I'm just going to get that one page. So this is a little bit old, so there are limited ways of actually being able to invoke it. And I'm going to right-click, attack, and see here we've got various options for force browsing the site, the directory, or the directory in children, which I will choose that one. And then what it'll do, it will basically start doing force browsing. And in this case, it is not doing any crawling at all. It is just trying to hit the target application with a load of well-known directories and file names. And you can see it's actually found quite a few of the budget pages, including the JS directory. And the things it's found has got this little hammer icon on as well. Now, the thing is, the force browse will only do gets because it's not really parsing things. It's not having a look to find out whether they're forms or not. So it's very much a way of finding things where there aren't any links to them. So I guess I kind of see it more as a manual technique, and we don't actually have an API for it. Partly historic because it was one of the earliest, it was quite an early component to add to ZAP, but it's not been one of our priorities for adding an API. We do intend to add the API for it, we just haven't got around to it, and it's not a high priority thing. So it'll carry on for some time and may find some false positives, but what it needs, it requires a word list, and we include just one word list by default, and it has a load of options. So it's got your default file. You can import your own file if you want, and you've got various options for extensions to ignore and whether you want to force browse files as well. Now, there are some add-ons on the marketplace, so search for force, and we will see we've got 3 sets of files, and one is direct. So these are files I think were included with Dirbuster, and we've moved them out partly, I think it's for space reasons mainly, because they're pretty big. So we've got the directory list v2.3, and one's in lowercase as well, and then we've got the SVN digger files. So SVN digger is another project. I can't remember if it's open source or not. I think it might be, but we asked and they were very kindly allowed us to include these files. So you can install any of those and use any of those, or you can actually use your own as well. So we don't have options for timing out the forced browse after a period of time. If you want it to be shorter, then use a smaller word list. So this is something that I said it can be very useful for, particularly if you're doing a manual pen test, you want to find things that you don't know about. If you're a developer, then it's probably less useful. You're less likely to have directories or URLs that you don't know about, and if you do know ones and they're not accessible via any other way, then you can just make a request to them. You can proxy a request or use the API to make a request, and then spider them from there or import them as API definitions or whatever you like. But if you're doing manual pen testing, then this is an option. As I said, we don't have an API for it, but if I'll just go back to ZAP extensions, then it's actually called brute force, because that was the original name until people pointed out that technically it was force browse. So we changed the name in the UI, but didn't change the add-on name, or not the name in the code. And if you go down into the source, you'll see Dirbuster. So this is the original Dirbuster code. It is no longer maintained, but actually I think that's a test. So yeah, there's more. Sorry, all the Dirbuster stuff is full code is under here. So Dirbuster is an abandoned project, but we import it into ZAP and we now maintain this code base. And here is the kind of ZAP wrapper around it. And you'll see there's no file with API in there. I said that's on the list to do, but that is, as far as I'm aware, all of the different ways that you can actually explore your application. So I've talked about in previous session, talked about the standard spider. So that is very effective for traditional applications, but doesn't handle modern web applications, which create links out of JavaScript. Talked about the Ajax Spider, which launches browsers and is very good for modern web applications. So it can handle any JavaScript that a browser can handle, but it is a bit slower than the traditional spider. And then we've got various options with importing URLs and importing definitions, which could be OpenAPI, GraphQL, SOAP in the not too distant future again. And if there are any other definitions, then get in touch, or if you'd like to write any add-ons to importing definitions, then get in touch with me, because we always want to hear about these things. So that is exploring your application with ZAP and all the different ways I can think of. Any questions from any of the folks here?
The forced browsing versus spidering, it seems like it's just get requests and it works off of just a word list.
Yeah, so the spidering is following links. So the traditional spider, you have to have a starting point, and then it finds links in the HTML. Forced browse is assuming you're not looking for stuff you've already got linked. So it's just trying things that we haven't seen any evidence of. And there's some very big word lists, and it can hammer things quite quickly. So it's quite a good thing for manual pen testing, where you go, right, let's see if there's something hidden that we shouldn't know about. So I said, if you're if you're developers and you're testing your application, you're less likely to need forced browse. You should know about what's in your application. If you're not sure, then forced browse is a good option. But particularly when you're automating testing, then if you're not aware of the application, you might do a forced browse, but then you found something, you go, okay, well, as part of our testing, we will now make a request to this endpoint, and then we can spider or whatever from there.
Okay, and did you mention that the forced browse, there was still ZAP API endpoints for that, or that's an extension? There are no API?
There aren't any API endpoints. We plan to do it. It's on the list, but it's just not high enough up, because it's less. I think you're less likely to want to automate this. I can still see cases where you'd want to. So we want to do it, but we've got a long list of stuff, and it's not high enough up yet.
Sure.
And if someone came up with a really good excuse or reason, or if someone wants to help out, this is particularly for people listening afterwards. We're always looking for contributors, and we've always got loads of things we can work on, including lots of nicely self-contained things where we can go, okay, here's some examples of how things should be done. Here's where we're not doing it right. Please help. Okay, so it's a slightly shorter session this time. But next time, what I want to do is talk about the sites tree. And until then, goodbye.